And to Russia Eats is brought to you by the Minnesota Pork Board. News that really is resonating throughout the Minnesota hospitality community, but especially the craft beer community, that one of our larger craft brewing tap rooms, Bauhaus Brewery, announced today that after 12 years, Bauhaus is going to close its Northeast Minneapolis tap room. The reasons, as stated by Bauhaus in a social media post, were multiple because every time something closes, there are a multitude of reasons. And also, every time something closes, people grab onto whatever issue resonates with them and they say, no, it's crime, it's this, it's whatever. But there is a shift happening in craft brewing. And I wanted to get some insight from the Minnesota Craft Brewers Association, the Guild, and Bob Gallagher is with the Craft Brewers Guild. He's on the John Schuster Coldwell Banker Hotline with us. Bob, this one hurts. Bauhaus is a pretty big tap room. They're widely available in liquor stores and in bars and restaurants all over the state. Were you surprised by this?
I would say I'm feeling a lot of emotions, but surprise is not necessarily the top of them. Partly because, I try to stay on top of things, and I know the folks at Bauhaus, so I know that they have been feeling the pain points for a little while now, as is every brewery. But that's kind of the main point. Is it's not shocking, but it is sad, and everyone is feeling kind of a lot of the same things that they alluded to in their post.
All right, we'll talk about some of those things in just a minute. But this year and last year, we've seen Lynn Lake, Wild Mine Artisan Ales in Minneapolis, Burning Brothers in St. Paul, Alloy in Coon Rapids, Invictus in Blaine, Schrammhaus in Chaska, Hoops in Duluth. Those are some of the big names that have closed. Are we sort of at the bursting of the bubble? I think that's a question that people have wondered. I mean, ever since we had 10 tap rooms, people were asking me, are there too many? It's going to be a bubble.
Right.
I've always thought it's similar to coffee houses. Like you never have too many coffee houses. There's no bubble. But with craft breweries, I do think there is limited shelf space. There are limited tap handles. And we've seen maybe a shift in the way people are drinking. So is this a bubble bursting?
Yeah, I don't think it is the classic bubble analogy that a lot of people use. Having said that, full recognition that if there are more of the same types of businesses in a certain geographic location, there's going to be more competition. Of course, that's true. But what we've seen, and we've been saying, the past couple of years, that the craft beer industry has just been maturing. And, we are no longer on a triple-digit year-over-year growth campaign, which honestly, name me one other American industry that has ever experienced that.
Right.
So, just because it is not as celebratory doesn't mean that it is that the sky is falling. Having said that, it is getting harder and harder. But in Minnesota, 2025 was the first year where we saw more closings than openings. And so we actually bucked the national trend for quite some time. So we were either the last or one of the last states to actually see more openings. So we are now feeling what I think the rest of the country, and quite frankly, alcohol consumption is declining across the globe. So we have to deal with all those realities. But I don't think the changing consumer is necessarily indicative of any bubble bursting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, let's talk about the changing consumer because I've read the same things I think that you have read and that many of our listeners has read, that alcohol consumption in general is down, but more specifically, beer consumption and craft beer consumption is down. What are you seeing there? Is this just changing taste or changing demographics?
I think it's partly changing demographic, and actually, beer consumption is and sales are doing better than even wine and spirits. I have to remind my members sometimes to thank God we are not in wine right now. But
wine is brutal. Wine is brutal, but it's alcohol in general.
It is. Yep. And I think that's attributable to a number of different things, whether that is GLP-1s, whether that is Gen Z being more health conscious. I think the whole globe, especially coming out of a pandemic, is starting to feel a little bit more conscious of their health and being more mindful. And there's nothing wrong with that. Having said that, alcohol we're part of the reason agriculture exists. We've been doing this since Sumeria. So I'm not like freaking out that alcohol consumption is going to go away here. But the consumer is always going to continue changing. And, the question is just how do you change with that? And so at the Guild, we've always been very supportive, especially of the non-alcoholic sector in Minnesota, especially because we have such a large recovery community. And we have members who are making excellent non-alcoholic beer. But then also we pioneered the THC beverage space and hemp beverage space. So we have seen the consumer shift a little bit. But having said that, I have to remind folks too that breweries, brew pubs, bars, restaurants, these are the last remaining third spaces in America. And we might make beer, but what we're supplying is community. We are those community gathering places. And I think people are always going to be drawn to those places. I think the question of just what are they consuming when they go there is ultimately what keeps shifting and what we're trying to keep up with.
Bob Gallagher is with the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild. Now, Bauhaus mentioned a couple different things specifically for the reason to closing. One is they said substantial cost increases in their supply chain. What are they talking about there?
Across the board, we have been, maybe a bit louder than some of our members would wish, and some other guilds as well. But since the tariffs on aluminum and Canadian tariffs were announced, we have been very vocal that tariffs are just a price increase. And so we are seeing that now start to actually rear its head. It's taken a little bit of time. But also, beer has to get from point A to point B somehow, and that's by trucks. So any rising price in transportation or gas is obviously going to hit us a lot. There's also, barley price increases. I think not a lot of people realize that a lot of barley used in American brewing comes from Canada. So, dealing with all of those intricacies is incredibly complex, and ultimately it just is going to lead to a price increase. And I think any brewer you talk to, the first words out of their mouth is, we don't want to raise prices. I think they have eaten the costs as much as they could. And so I think it is frustrating for the owners and the bartenders, just maybe even more so than to the consumer, in my opinion.
How much does the uncertainty over THC beverages and the fact that the federal government has passed legislation that would essentially outlaw the ability to ship THC beverages from one state to the next?
Yeah, it's top of mind for most folks. I don't think when I was in DC this last February, I made no illusions that between the THC ban and Operation Metro Surge, we're facing what I would refer to as an oncoming storm of possible decimation. The folks are hurting, and it's not just breweries and brew pubs, although obviously that's who I speak for, but I think it's also bars and restaurants, and I think it's small business across the board. So the THC part in particular is incredibly frustrating, especially because we've been trying to advocate for the responsible regulation of these products, just like we do in Minnesota since 2023. That conversation is certainly happening, which we're grateful for. Maybe grateful isn't the word for Mitch McConnell pulling this, but having said that, the conversation is happening, and we're still having those conversations. But it would be incredibly, incredibly impactful. And for us, part of the frustration is why? What is the point of this ban? Because we have seen, great success and a new, not only product to offer consumers, this has also brought in new consumers into the market. And we haven't seen any increase in traffic accidents. We've seen no deaths directly attributable to hemp products. So, when they say they want to protect kids from consuming this, we agree. That's why we passed law making sure that it couldn't be served in an outside 21+ environment. So, but there's a lot of jobs at stake currently.
Bob, talk about what you mean when you mention Operation Metro Surge, because as one would expect, the mere act of me quoting Bauhaus's statement has upset those who don't understand. If Minnesotans were so tough to stand up against Operation Metro Surge, and now they're what? Why are they not going out? What does that have to do with an ongoing impact now that we're a couple months away from when Operation Metro Surge wound down, at least.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's incredibly impactful, and it was a hard conversation. Still is a hard conversation. It's one that I've been trying to have with both federal and state legislators. Is whether or not you believe in a policy, that doesn't mean that it's not going to have implications and some kind of push. And Metro Search has been incredibly impactful for small business across the board, and I can just say, at least for breweries and brew pubs, we had a fair amount of folks see anywhere between 30 to 60% decrease year over year in traffic to their tap room. And that's during January, which is already the most painful month for hospitality and breweries and brew pubs.
Is it still lingering, Bob, or have things come back a little more to normal?
I think it's definitely picked up. We're trying to keep track of the numbers. I think we're starting to hit a little bit more. But the good thing about Minnesotans, and I've always said to our brewery and brew pub members, is you take care of your community will take care of you. And I think folks are showing that as well. They're coming out, and especially now that patio season is beginning. But ultimately, Metro Surge, as I was telling federal legislators, this was a state-specific pandemic. And I told my members during COVID, it's going to hurt, but coming out of it is going to be even more painful. And I think that's also kind of the case for Metro Surge, as we're trying to find some kind of balance. We're not going to see a whole bunch of spikes in sales left and right. So what is this new normal, and how do we move forward? And honestly, we've been championing some kind of economic relief at the Capitol, and we haven't gotten it, and it doesn't look like we're going to. But this has been incredibly impactful.
Are city policies an issue at all? Minimum wage, the sort of the leave, the family and medical leave requirements now. I mean, these are factors too, right?
100%, yeah, and rising labor costs is certainly one of the issues as well. And that doesn't mean that the employees don't deserve a higher wage; they absolutely do. But we also need to find where that money is going to come from and how to actually pay them a higher living wage. And so I think some of those policies for sure are impactful. I think also there is an element of taxation, depending on what city you are in, what county you are in. Sales tax is a big thing to take into consideration. And when it comes to, an actual tip, percentage, or whether or not you're doing just a hospitality baseline, dealing with that and the implementation of that has been a struggle. And I think a lot of the closures, I would never, try to speak for anybody, but I don't think every closure is certainly about somebody not being able to pay their bills. I think there's also an element of just frustration and burnout. Running a small business is hard no matter what, but under the current circumstances, it's completely unfair. And so I think a lot of people are just realizing that they don't want to do COVID again.
Bob Gallagher with the Craft Brewers. I appreciate the time. I hate to even ask this final question, but do you expect more of this, more closures?
Yeah, I do. And every one of them is going to be absolutely as sad as the next. But we're doing our best to make sure that there is some kind of pathways and, as Bauhaus put it, levers for folks to use. But that continues to get more difficult by the day. So we're going to keep struggling. And if there was anything that I would say or ask of anybody out there, it's go support your local brewery, brew pub, bar, restaurant, small business. Doesn't matter. Right now, small business is hurting across the board. So support your own community.
Bob, thank you.